What happens when one of music's most legendary icons comes face-to-face with late-night television's most controversial host? You won't believe what unfolds when Cher sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview, only to witness one of the most explosive confrontations in talk show history. The tension that erupted last night has sent shockwaves through Hollywood and left viewers stunned by what they witnessed unfold live on television. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two entertainment powerhouses clash in the most unexpected way possible. The stage was set for what appeared to be another typical Tuesday night episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live. Cher, the iconic singer and actress, had been booked to promote her latest documentary and upcoming tour dates. The 77-year-old superstar arrived at the Hollywood Boulevard studio looking radiant in a flowing black ensemble, her trademark long hair cascading over her shoulders. She'd done hundreds of these interviews over her 6-decade career, and this was supposed to be just another friendly chat about her latest projects. But from the moment Cher walked onto that familiar set, something felt different. The usual warmth that characterizes most celebrity interviews was noticeably absent. Kimmel, known for his quick wit and sometimes sharp tongue, seemed unusually tense as he welcomed the Grammy-winning legend to his show. The audience erupted in their typical enthusiastic applause, completely unaware that they were about to witness television history in the making. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the one and only Cher," Kimmel announced with his signature grin, but those paying close attention could detect something forced about his enthusiasm. Cher gracefully made her way to the guest chair, waving to the crowd with the poise that only comes from decades of performing in front of millions. The first few minutes proceeded normally enough. Kimmel asked about Cher's documentary, which chronicles her rise from a backup singer to one of the world's most recognizable entertainers. Cher responded with her characteristic candor and humor, sharing anecdotes about her early days in the music industry and her evolution as an artist. The audience was clearly captivated by her stories, hanging on every word as she described the challenges of being a woman in the male-dominated entertainment world of the 1960s. However, seasoned viewers of late-night television could sense an underlying current of tension brewing beneath the surface. Kimmel's questions, while seemingly innocuous, carried a subtle edge that hadn't been present in his previous interviews with major stars. His follow-up questions seemed designed to push boundaries rather than simply facilitate conversation. "You know Cher. You've been very vocal about politics lately," Kimmel said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that would soon prove to be ill-advised. "Some people might say that celebrities should stick to entertaining and leave the serious stuff to the politicians." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Cher's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but those familiar with her fiery personality recognized the warning signs. Her posture straightened and her eyes narrowed slightly as she processed what had just been said to her on live television. "Well, Jimmy," Cher replied, her voice maintaining its melodic quality while carrying an unmistakable steel undertone. "I've been around long enough to know that staying silent when you see injustice isn't really an option for me anymore." The audience applauded enthusiastically, but Kimmel seemed determined to press further. What happened next would set the stage for one of the most uncomfortable moments in late-night television history. "But don't you think there's a responsibility that comes with having such a large platform?" Kimmel continued, his tone becoming more pointed. "I mean, when you tweet something to your millions of followers, shouldn't you be more careful about the message you're sending?" The question struck a nerve that Kimmel clearly hadn't anticipated. Cher's decades of experience dealing with dismissive attitudes toward her intelligence and political awareness came flooding back in that moment. This wasn't just another interview question. It was a challenge to her right to have opinions, delivered with the kind of condescending tone that she'd been fighting against her entire career. The tension in the studio became palpable as Cher took a moment to formulate her response. And what came next would change everything. "Careful," Cher repeated, her voice rising slightly as she leaned forward in her chair. Jimmy, I've been careful my entire life. I was careful when I was told I couldn't sing. Careful when I was told I couldn't act. And careful when I was told to keep my mouth shut about things that matter. But you know what? Being careful got me nowhere except pushed around by men who thought they knew better. The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't the light-hearted banter they'd come to expect from celebrity interviews. Kimmel, perhaps realizing he'd struck a deeper nerve than intended, attempted to backtrack with his trademark humor, but the damage was already done. Hey, I'm just saying that with great power comes great responsibility, Kimmel said with a forced chuckle, making a Spider-Man reference that fell completely flat in the increasingly tense atmosphere. Maybe we could all use a little more Spider-Man wisdom in our Twitter feeds. The joke landed with a resounding thud. Cher's expression hardened, and for a moment, the legendary performer looked every bit as formidable as she had during her most powerful, on-stage moments. The woman who had conquered every entertainment medium wasn't about to be dismissed or patronized on live television. Are you seriously comparing my political engagement to a comic book character? Cher asked, her voice now carrying the full weight of her decades in the spotlight. Jimmy, I've used my platform to raise awareness about issues that affect real people's lives. I've supported veterans, LGBTQ+ rights, and social justice causes for longer than some of your viewers have been alive. The studio audience began to murmur among themselves, sensing that something unprecedented was unfolding before their eyes. This wasn't scripted banter or a promotional segment gone slightly off track. This was a genuine confrontation between two entertainment figures with vastly different perspectives on celebrity responsibility. Kimmel, now clearly flustered by the direction the interview had taken, made the critical error of doubling down, instead of gracefully changing the subject. His next words would prove to be the point of no return in what had started as a routine late-night appearance. Look, Cher, I respect your passion. I really do, Kimmel said, his tone becoming increasingly condescending. But sometimes I wonder if celebrities like yourself really understand the complexity of the issues you're tweeting about. I mean, do you really think a pop star's opinion on foreign policy carries the same weight as someone who's actually studied these things? The insult hit its mark with devastating precision. Cher's face flushed with anger as she processed what had just been said to her in front of millions of viewers. The dismissive phrase, pop star, reducing her entire multifaceted career to a single diminutive label, was the final straw in what had become an increasingly hostile exchange. A pop star? Cher's voice was now ice-cold, each word delivered with surgical precision. Jimmy, I've been fighting for causes you probably couldn't even pronounce when I started my career. I've testified before Congress. I've worked with humanitarian organizations around the world. And I've put my money where my mouth is for decades. The audience was now completely silent, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. Even the usually animated studio crowd seemed to understand that they were witnessing something extraordinary and potentially career-defining for both participants. Kimmel, perhaps sensing that the interview was spiraling beyond his control, attempted one final maneuver to regain the upper hand. His next comment would prove to be the catalyst for what happened next, transforming an already tense situation into a full-blown confrontation that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. Hey, I'm not trying to attack you here, Kimmel said, raising his hands in mock surrender while maintaining his smug expression. I'm just suggesting that maybe, just maybe, there's value in listening to experts instead of getting our news from celebrity Twitter accounts. That's all I'm saying. The condescending tone, combined with the dismissive gesture, was the final provocation that pushed Cher beyond her breaking point. What happened next would shock everyone in that studio and cement this moment as one of the most explosive confrontations in late-night television history. Cher stood up abruptly from her chair, her movement so sudden and forceful that it startled everyone in the studio. The legendary performer, all 5'8" of her, towered over the seated host with a presence that commanded immediate attention. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the full power of someone who had spent decades refusing to be silenced. "Listen to experts." Cher's voice cut through the studio like a blade. "Jimmy, I am an expert on what it's like to be marginalized, what it's like to fight for your place in this world, and what it's like to use whatever platform you have to make things better. You sit behind this desk every night making jokes about politicians and celebrities, but when have you ever put yourself on the line for anything that matters?" The audience was completely stunned into silence. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was a raw, unfiltered moment of genuine anger from one of the most beloved figures in show business. Kimmel's face had gone pale as he realized that his guest was no longer playing by the usual talk show rules. "Cher, please, let's just—" Kimmel began, but she cut him off with a wave of her hand that beaked no interruption. "No, you don't get to share. Please me after what you just said," she fired back, her voice rising to fill every corner of the studio. "You want to talk about celebrity Twitter accounts? Let me tell you something about my Twitter account, Jimmy. When I tweet about veterans' issues, it's because I've spent years working with wounded warriors. When I tweet about civil rights, it's because I lived through the fight for equality. When I tweet about humanitarian crisis, it's because I've been to those places and seen the suffering firsthand." The production crew behind the cameras stood, frozen, unsure whether to keep rolling or cut to commercial. This was uncharted territory in late-night television, and everyone present seemed to understand they were witnessing something that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. Kimmel, now visibly sweating under the studio lights, made another critical miscalculation. Instead of attempting to de-escalate the situation with a genuine apology, he chose to maintain his defensive posture, apparently believing he could still salvage the interview through humor. "Look, I think we're getting a little heated here," Kimmel said with a nervous laugh, gesturing toward his guest as if she were an overreacting child. "Maybe we should take a deep breath and remember that we're all friends here. This is supposed to be fun, right?" The patronizing gesture and dismissive tone proved to be the final straw. Cher's eyes flashed with a fury that decades of dealing with condescending men had been building toward. What she said next would be quoted in headlines around the world within hours. "Friends." Cher's voice dropped to a deadly whisper that somehow carried more menace than her earlier shouting. "Jimmy, friends don't ambush each other on live television. Friends don't dismiss each other's life's work as celebrity nonsense. And friends sure as hell don't tell each other to take a deep breath when they're calling out disrespectful behavior." The studio had become so quiet that the hum of the cameras was audible. Even the typically animated audience seemed to be holding their collective breath, sensing that they were witnessing a moment that would define both careers in ways neither participant had anticipated. Kimmel, perhaps finally recognizing the gravity of the situation he had created, attempted one last desperate move to regain control of his own show. His next words would prove to be the final catalyst that transformed an already explosive situation into television history. "Okay, you know what? I think maybe we should just agree to disagree here," Kimmel said, his voice taking on an edge of irritation that betrayed his growing frustration with his guest's refusal to play along. "This is getting a little too intense for a comedy show, don't you think? Maybe we should talk about something lighter, like your new tour dates or something." The attempt to trivialize the confrontation and redirect to promotional material was perhaps the most insulting move Kimmel could have made at that moment. Cher's response was immediate and devastating, delivered with the kind of controlled fury that only comes from years of fighting for respect in an industry that had consistently tried to diminish her. "Too intense for a comedy show," Cher repeated, her voice now carrying a dangerous calm that was somehow more unsettling than her earlier anger. "Jimmy, the only thing too intense here is your inability to treat a guest with basic respect. You invited me on your show. You attacked my credibility. You dismissed my intelligence. And now you want to pretend it never happened." What followed next would be the moment that everyone in that studio would remember for the rest of their lives. Cher took a step closer to Kimmel's desk, her presence commanding every square inch of the studio space. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 6 decades in the entertainment industry and the authority of someone who had fought every battle twice. "You know what, Jimmy? I've sat through thousands of interviews in my career. I've dealt with hosts who were unprepared, hosts who were rude, and hosts who clearly didn't want me there. But I have never, and I mean never, had someone invite me onto their show just to systematically tear down everything I stand for while hiding behind fake smiles and comedy." The camera operators continued filming, understanding instinctively that they were capturing television gold, even as the situation spiraled far beyond anyone's expectations. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His usual confidence completely evaporated in the face of Cher's righteous fury. "I think you're overreacting," Kimmel began, but Cher's voice cut through his words like thunder. "Overreacting?" Cher's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Jimmy, I'm underreacting. Do you have any idea what it's like to spend your entire career having men tell you that your opinions don't matter? That you should stick to singing and looking pretty? I thought we were past that, but apparently some people never learn." She turned to face the audience directly, her voice carrying to every corner of the studio and through the cameras to millions of viewers at home who were witnessing this unprecedented moment in late-night television. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is what disrespect looks like in 2025, Cher announced, her voice clear and strong. "It's not always obvious. Sometimes it comes wrapped in fake concern about responsibility and suggestions that you don't understand the issues you've been fighting for longer than some people have been alive." The audience remained silent, transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. Many were reaching for their phones, already knowing that what they were witnessing would be shared across every social media platform within minutes. Kimmel, now red-faced and clearly rattled, made one final attempt to salvage the situation. "Cher, I never meant to save it." Cher cut him off with a finality that left no room for argument. "You meant every word, Jimmy. The question is whether you're adult, enough to own it." She walked back to where she had been sitting and picked up her purse with deliberate, measured movements. Every gesture was calculated to demonstrate that she was leaving on her own terms, not being driven away, but choosing to remove herself from a situation that had become beneath her dignity. "You know what the saddest part of all this is?" Cher said, turning back to face Kimmel one final time. "I actually came here tonight excited to talk about my work, my documentary, my tour. I came here ready to share stories that might inspire people, to talk about the incredible journey I've been on. Instead, I got ambushed by someone who clearly has no respect for his guests or their experiences." The studio remained deathly quiet as Cher continued, her voice now carrying a tone of disappointment that was somehow more devastating than her earlier anger. "Jimmy, you have a platform that reaches millions of people every night. You could use it to lift people up, to celebrate their achievements, to have meaningful conversations about the issues that matter. Instead, you chose to use it to tear down a guest who came here in good faith. That says everything anyone needs to know about your character." Kimmel sat frozen behind his desk, apparently realizing that anything he said at this point would only make the situation worse. The man who made his living through quick wit and clever comebacks had been rendered completely speechless by the sheer force of Cher's authentic outrage. "I've been in this business for over 60 years, Cher continued, her voice now carrying a note of sadness alongside the anger. "I've seen it change, I've seen it grow, and I've seen it become more inclusive and more respectful. But apparently some corners of it are still stuck in the past, still operating under the assumption that they can dismiss and belittle women who dare to have opinions." She paused at the edge of the stage area, turning back for one final statement that would be quoted in every entertainment publication for weeks to come. "To everyone watching at home, remember this moment. Remember that respect isn't something you earn by staying quiet and playing nice. Respect is something you demand when you're being treated poorly and something you give freely when others deserve it. Jimmy clearly doesn't understand either concept. With that, Cher walked off the set with the same grace and dignity she had brought to thousands of performances throughout her legendary career. The sound of her heels clicking against the studio floor was the only noise in a space that typically buzzed with energy and laughter. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, facing a silent audience and cameras that continued to roll, capturing his stunned expression for posterity. The host, who prided himself on being able to handle any situation, had been completely overwhelmed by a guest who refused to accept disrespectful treatment. The incident immediately exploded across social media, with clips of the confrontation going viral within minutes of the show's conclusion. Respect Cher began trending worldwide as viewers shared their support for the legendary performer's refusal to accept dismissive treatment. The overwhelming response was one of admiration for Cher's courage in standing up for herself, and by extension for all the women who had been similarly dismissed and patronized throughout their careers. Within hours, Kimmel's ratings had plummeted as viewers expressed their displeasure with his conduct, and entertainment industry insiders began questioning whether the host had permanently damaged his reputation with his handling of one of music's most beloved icons. The confrontation had lasting consequences that extended far beyond a single television appearance, serving as a powerful reminder that respect and dignity are non-negotiable, regardless of the setting.